Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that after Patrick Henry gave his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, members of the Virginia militia embroidered "liberty" or "death" on their flags and clothing? Learn how less than a month after Henry's speech, the battles of Lexington and Concord began the Revolutionary War. Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. I'm really excited you're joining us because we're looking at something pretty incredible today.
Yeah, we've got some amazing historical sources on the table.
Exactly. I mean, when you think about how a massive world-altering conflict begins, usually picture like a physical spark, right? A kinetic event.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You think of troops mobilizing across a border, or maybe sudden assassination.
Right, or literally just a gunshot ringing out across a battlefield. We're kind of trained to look for that undeniable physical action, the point of no return.
Yeah, because a physical action is just easy to pinpoint in the historical record. It leaves a crater.
Yeah.
It leaves casualties. It's an incredibly neat and tidy way to organize history in our heads.
But sometimes the fuse isn't made of gunpowder at all. I mean, sometimes you just have a room full of oxygen, a staggering amount of political tension, and words.
Just words.
Just a handful of carefully chosen, perfectly calibrated words that hit the air and completely ignite the atmosphere. So today we have this fascinating stack of historical sources laid out in front of us, and we're zeroing in on a single man, a highly specific moment in St. John's Church, and basically the absolute raw nerve of the American Revolution.
We are looking at a phrase that is completely embedded in our cultural DNA. Just 7 words, really. Give me liberty or give me death.
Yeah, you see it on bumper stickers. It's recited in elementary school plays. It's just everywhere.
It really is.
But our mission for this deep dive is to completely strip away the catchphrase. We're using these sources to reconstruct the suffocating, intense pressure cooker of a room that actually forged those words.
Right.
We really want to tear down the mechanics of the rhetoric to see why it worked on a psychological level. And, explore the terrifying reality of how a single speech can literally launch a war.
What's fascinating here is that when you immerse yourself in the historical reality of March 1775, revolution was absolutely not a foregone conclusion.
Not at all.
I mean, we look back with centuries of hindsight and just assumed the split from Great Britain was inevitable. But the men sitting in that church in Richmond, Virginia, they were terrified.
They were looking for any possible exit ramp, weren't they?
Exactly. It took a masterful, almost unbelievable blend of airtight logic and visceral theatrics to strip away their denial and push them over the edge.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly grasp the explosive velocity of this speech, you really have to put yourself inside the agonizing tension gripping the colonies at that exact moment.
It was intense.
It's the Second Virginia Convention. So what is the actual temperature in the room at this point?
I mean, the temperature is basically panic masquerading as diplomacy.
Wow.
Yeah. Just a few months prior, delegates from the First Continental Congress had drafted this massive petition to King George III.
Right, the list of grievances.
Exactly. They didn't just ask for lower taxes. They meticulously documented 27 separate, distinct cases of abuses of power against the colonies.
And the Crown's response to this itemized list of grievances was, well, let's just say less than receptive.
That's an understatement.
By the time the delegates meet in March 1775, Boston Harbor is entirely shut down under a strict, punitive British blockade. The British military is actively choking the economic windpipe of one of the most vital colonial cities, all in direct retaliation for the Boston Tea Party.
Correct. You have an occupying military force actively starving a major port. The situation is physically deteriorated in a massive way.
Yeah.
Yet, despite this blatant aggression, the primary agenda of the Second Virginia Convention is to somehow figure out how to continue negotiating with the king peacefully.
Wait, I have to stop you there because the cognitive dissonance is staggering to me.
Oh, it really is.
Like, they've already listed 27 abuses. Boston is currently occupied by a hostile military force. Why on earth are these brilliant, highly educated men still trying to draft polite letters?
It's a great question.
Are they just cowards? Because it feels like a hostage negotiation where the captor is already actively harming people, but the negotiators keep treating it like a routine traffic stop just to maintain their own sanity.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it, honestly. because it hit exactly on the psychological barrier in that room. It was the paralyzing fear of treason.
Right, treason.
We casually throw around the word revelation today,
Yeah.
but in 1775, challenging the British crown wasn't just a political stance, it was an existential cliff.
Yeah.
Great Britain was the most formidable military empire on the globe.
And these delegates aren't anonymous peasants with nothing to lose either.
Exactly. These are wealthy landowners. They are lawyers, merchants, men of really high social standing.
They have everything to lose.
If they officially rebel and fail, which logically seemed highly probable against the British war machine, they don't just lose an election, they forfeit their estates. They ruin their descendants for generations. And they personally swing from a hangman's noose. So the default human instinct in that room wasn't defiance. It was deep, profound self-preservation.
They needed the hostage negotiation to stay a traffic stop because admitting it was a hostage situation meant they had to breach the building.
Exactly. They just weren't ready to breach.
Which brings us directly to the anomaly in the room. The one man who refuses to play along with the delusion.
Right.
Sitting alongside massive historical heavyweights, like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, is a lawyer from Hanover County named Patrick Henry.
Yeah.
And he looks at this hostage situation and decides it's time to breach.
Patrick Henry is such a fascinating profile. Our sources highlight that he possessed a highly specific toolkit. He had the analytical mind of a lawyer, a sharp, disarming sense of humor, and a remarkably resonant speaking voice.
And he uses all of it.
He really does.
Yeah.
He read the room, he saw the collective paralysis, and he just decided to force their hand.
He does the unthinkable. While the rest of the room is debating the phrasing of their next diplomatic plea to the king, Henry stands up and formally proposes that Virginia raise a militia.
Yeah, right in the middle of it.
He literally volunteers to start arming soldiers in Hanover County.
He introduces a resolution for armed defense right into the middle of a peace conference. And the backlash is immediate and fierce.
I bet.
The conservative delegates in the room are just appalled. They argue that Henry's proposal is wildly reckless, that London will view it as an unprovoked escalation, and that he's essentially pouring gasoline on a fire they're desperately trying to extinguish.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Henry doesn't shout them down.
Oh, no, he doesn't.
He doesn't throw a tantrum when they attack his resolution. The sources specifically note his restraint here. He sits there in the third pew of St. John's Church, and he lets these terrified men voice every single one of their objections.
He lets them tire themselves out.
Exactly. He lets them empty their magazines.
Yeah.
And only then does he rise.
There is an incredibly evocative account from a Baptist minister who was watching the proceedings. He noted that as Henry stood up, he had an unearthly fire burning in his eye.
Oh, chills.
Yeah. The entire atmospheric pressure of the church just shifted in that second.
But that fire doesn't just translate into an unhinged rant. I mean, if he just yells at them, they're going to dismiss him as a radical, right?
Evidently.
Instead, he uses the precision of a surgeon to dissect their entire worldview. How does he actually dismantle the deep-seated fear of these wealthy landowners?
By using their own rationality against them. He begins by respectfully acknowledging their patriotism, which kind of disarms them with courtesy.
Smart.
But then he pivots to this brilliant piece of logical framing. He tells the delegates, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past.
The lamp of experience, it's such a vivid metaphor, but mechanically it's doing so much heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely.
He's speaking to men of the Enlightenment. They value empirical data. So he's essentially saying, don't trust my anger, trust your own eyes.
Precisely. He shifts the burden of proof. He basically says, show me the historical precedent over the last 10 years that suggests the British Crown will respond to our polite letters with anything other than subjugation.
Right. Like, look at the track record, guys.
He forces them to confront the fact that their hope for a peaceful resolution is completely divorced from the empirical reality of the situation.
He builds a legal case against hope, because in this room, hope is actually the enemy of survival. And he doesn't let them look away.
No, he doesn't.
He forces them to mentally map out the physical reality happening right outside the walls of the church. He points to the martial array, the British ships, the troops, the growing navy, and he asks them, why are these fleets here?
And he answers his own question with a devastating blow. He says, they are meant for us, they can be meant for no other.
That line is so chilling. It's the ultimate reality check.
It really is.
He is grabbing them by the shoulders and saying, "The British didn't park a war fleet in our harbor to help us negotiate a lease. The fleet is here to level the house."
He is systematically erasing the middle ground.
Dang.
Up until this moment, the delegates believe they have a third option, delay, negotiate, compromise.
Yeah.
Henry's rhetorical brilliance is in proving that the third option is a ghost. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
He tells them, the war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms.
No.
Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle?
He's creating this overwhelming sense of urgency. The war isn't a hypothetical future event you can just vote against anymore. It is an active, ongoing reality that is speeding toward you.
Yes, exactly.
But he doesn't just rely on logic, does he? I mean, the sources detail a physical performance that practically shattered the polite decorum of that 18th century church.
This is where the lawyer and the orator merge perfectly. As he builds to his emotional crescendo, Henry attacks the core indignity of their situation. He asks, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery?
Just incredible phrasing.
And as he says this, historical accounts suggest he actually crossed his wrists in front of him, physically mimicking the posture of a man bound in heavy iron shackles.
He makes the invisible political bondage deeply, uncomfortably physical. I mean, he is looking at some of the wealthiest, most powerful men in Virginia, and he's painting chains onto their wrists.
He forces them to visualize their own subjugation. And then he shatters the imagery.
Yeah.
He raises his hands toward the heavens, still held together, and delivers the ultimatum that erases any lingering doubt. Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
Put yourself in that third pew, just the sheer force of that binary choice, liberty or death. He has taken a complex geopolitical crisis and distilled it into the most primal human ultimatum possible. The atmosphere in that church just collapses.
The immediate aftermath described in the sources is profound. It was just dead silence.
Which is the loudest possible response to a speech like that.
Oh, for sure. The delegates were completely stunned. Every eye was locked on him. Henry had stripped away every comfortable rationalization they had constructed over the past several years. There was nowhere left to hide.
And the power of that moment wasn't just contained to the political elites either. The sources mention this incredible, almost haunting anecdote about a man who was standing outside St. John's Church.
Oh, yeah, listening through the windows.
Right, he was listening to the speech through the windows. And he was so intensely moved by the physical and vocal power of Henry's delivery that he proclaimed right then and there, "Let me be buried at this spot."
It's a stunning detail. It speaks to the sheer emotional velocity of the rhetoric. And actually, his widow honored that request decades later. He was buried exactly where he stood, and his grave remains in that churchyard today. That is how deeply a well-crafted argument can penetrate the human soul.
So what does this all mean? We have a masterful display of rhetoric. We have a stunned room of wealthy landowners and men at the windows begging to be buried on the spot.
Yeah.
But how does that strictly verbal event translate into the kinetic reality of a war?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the translation from words to kinetic action was terrifyingly fast. Henry delivered this speech on March 23, 1775.
Okay.
Less than a month later, British troops and colonial militiamen fired upon each other at Lexington and Concord. The war literally began just weeks after he declared that it had already started.
So he didn't just predict the future. His rhetoric actively accelerated it. He gave them the psychological permission to fight back.
Exactly. And the speech mobilized the wider public in a way diplomatic letters never could. Following Henry's address, men across Virginia rushed to join independent militia companies.
They were ready.
They were so deeply galvanized by his ultimatum that many of them adopted liberty or death as their literal uniform.
Oh.
They embroidered the words right onto the breasts of their hunting shirts.
No way.
Yeah, they painted it on their flags. It became the viral organizing ideology of the entire colonial defense.
They took his personal conviction and wore it as armor. And the impact wasn't lost on the men sitting in that room either. Thomas Jefferson, who was obviously a master of the written word himself, later assessed Henry's impact on the era.
What did he say?
Well, Jefferson stated that Henry was before us all in maintaining the spirit of the revolution.
Wow.
Jefferson is essentially conceding that while he may have drafted the legal framework with the Declaration of Independence, Patrick Henry was the engine that provided the spiritual and psychological momentum required to even attempt it.
It's a recognition that logic alone doesn't start revolutions. You need the unearthly fire to overcome the profound human instinct to just keep your head down and survive.
Absolutely.
And what's truly compelling is that the sources we are looking at draw a fascinating thematic parallel here. They actually compare Henry's rhetorical strategy to a much older historical account.
Right, from the Book of Ella.
Yes, Captain Moroni, specifically chapter 43, verse 48.
Yes, the source notes that when Captain Moroni's army was facing a terrifying, overwhelming enemy and was on the verge of shrinking back in fear, Moroni didn't just yell at them to fight.
He knew that wouldn't work.
Right. The text says he inspired their hearts with these thoughts, yea, the thoughts of their lands, their liberty, yea, their freedom from bondage.
It's a brilliant comparison because it highlights the universal architecture of human courage. Whether you are leading an ancient army or a room full of 18th century lawyers, the psychological trigger is exactly the same.
Yeah, it doesn't change.
When leaders bypass the immediate terror of the moment and remind people of their fundamental connection to their lands, their liberty, and the visceral horror of bondage, it unlocks a level of resolve that completely overpowers the biological instinct to retreat.
It proves that the human heart responds to the exact same call across thousands of years. The desire to throw off chains, whether those chains are a metaphorical tax policy or literal iron shackles, is a fundamental, hardwired human driver.
Exactly.
Henry just knew exactly how to reach into their chests and flip that switch when the stakes couldn't have been higher.
And he fully committed to the consequences of flipping that switch, too. Patrick Henry didn't just deliver a brilliant monologue and fade into the background while other men fought the war.
Right. He stayed in the fight.
He lived the rest of his life in the reality he helped create. He went on to serve as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. He helped draft the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and he served multiple terms as the governor of Virginia, eventually passing away in 1799.
He basically spent the rest of his life building the foundation of the country that his 7 words helped violently tear away from the British Empire.
Yeah, he really did.
As we close out our analysis of these sources, I want you to put yourself back in that church one last time. Think about the enduring, staggering power of absolute conviction. Think about what it takes for one person, relying solely on the empirical data of their own lamp of experience, to stand up in a room suffocating with fear and cognitive dissonance and completely alter the trajectory of human history.
It's incredible.
He did it simply by refusing to politely pretend that the house wasn't on fire. He forced his peers to look at the reality of the British blockade, he forced them to look at the troops, and he completely obliterated the illusion of a comfortable middle ground.
This raises an important question, and it is the thought we want to leave you to mull over today. If you were called upon right now to stand in a room full of hesitant people and deliver a message about freedom, and you were guided only by the lamp of your own lived experience, what would your defining message be?
What are the words that would ignite your own unearthly fire? Because if the sources we explored today prove anything, it's that the right words, wielded with absolute precision and conviction, are just as explosive as gunpowder. Absolutely. Sometimes all it takes to shatter an empire is a single voice rising from the third pew. We are so glad you joined us for this exploration, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive. Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.